The sky has vanished into a wall of screaming white. In the heart of a Maine blizzard, a young boy is missing. The police are grounded. The visibility is zero. Logan Reed and his dog Shadow are the only ones stepping into the death zone. But Shadow senses something the humans cannot. He stops. He tilts his head. Is it a heartbeat, or just the ghost of the wind? Can a soldier with a broken past and a dog with amber eyes save a soul from the freezing dark? And what secret does the old brass key in Logan's pocket truly hold? Support our journey by subscribing to our channel now. Chapter 1. The Key and the Silent Vow. The air in Clearwater did not just bite, it haunted. Logan Reed stood by the frozen shore of Moosehead Lake. His breath hitched in the wind. Memories of the desert were always hot, but here everything was white, cold, silent. Beside him, a heavy weight pressed against his leg. It was Shadow. The German shepherd was a mountain of gray and white fur. His coat was thick, weathered by years of Maine winters. Shadow did not bark. He simply existed. A silent anchor for a man drifting in the fog of his own mind. Logan looked at the gray water. He remembered a night years ago. A night when the ghosts of war were too loud. He had sat on this very pier, a broken seal with a loaded heart. Arthur Sterling had found him then. Arthur didn't offer advice. He didn't ask questions. The old man just sat down. He brought a young Shadow with him. They sat in the dark for hours. Just 3 souls breathing in the cold. That silence had saved Logan. It was the only medicine that worked. Now Arthur was gone. The funeral was small, but the tension in the lawyer's office was suffocating. Victor and Diana sat across the room. They smelled of expensive cologne and greed. They looked at the peeling wallpaper of Pine Rest Lodge like it was a stain on their shoes. Lawyer Harper cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses. The will is specific, Harper said. Logan Arthur has left the lodge to you. But there is a condition. Victor let out a sharp, jagged laugh. To him, he is a broken soldier, Victor sneered. He can barely stand in a room without jumping at shadows. Diana leaned back. Her eyes were cold stones. We will see you in court, Logan. This land is worth millions. You are just a temporary occupant. Logan felt the heat rising in his chest. His pulse began to drum. Suddenly, Shadow stood. The dog moved with the grace of a predator. He stepped between Logan and the relatives. Shadow did not growl. He didn't have to. He simply stared at Victor. His amber eyes were twin flames of authority. The room went quiet. Even Victor stopped talking. The lawyer handed Logan a small velvet pouch. This was not in the main inventory, Harper whispered. Arthur wanted you to have it personally. Logan reached inside. His fingers closed around something heavy, something cold. It was an old brass key. It was worn smooth by Arthur's thumb. Logan felt the weight of it. The 6-month trial was a mountain to climb. He had no money. He had no plan. But he had this key, and he had the memory of the man who never gave up on him. Logan looked at Victor. He didn't see a threat anymore. He saw a distraction. I am staying, Logan said. His voice was like gravel, low, final. The relatives stormed out into the snow. The door slammed. The lodge fell silent again. Logan walked into the main hall. The air was stale and freezing. He knelt by the great stone hearth. Shadow sat by the entrance. The dog's ears were pricked, listening to the wind. Logan struck a match. The flame was tiny, fragile. He fed it wood shavings, then a dry pine log. The fire caught. Orange light danced across the dusty floorboards. Logan leaned his back against the stone. He felt the warmth beginning to seep into his bones. He gripped the brass key in his pocket. "I am home, Arthur," he whispered. Shadow looked back at him once. Then the dog turned his gaze back to the door. The watch had begun. Chapter 2. The Language of Empathy. Winter in Maine is not a season, it is a siege. The frost crawled across the windows of Pine Rest Lodge like skeletal fingers. Logan Reed spent his mornings fighting back. He hammered loose boards. He caulked the gaps in the window frames. Every strike of his hammer echoed through the empty halls. It was a hollow sound. The silence of the lodge was heavy. It reminded him too much of the lonely watches in the desert. But he was not alone. Shadow was always there. The big German shepherd moved like a gray ghost through the corridors. His paws made a soft rhythm on the hardwood. Shadow did not just watch Logan. He watched the world outside. One Tuesday morning, the wind turned vicious. The temperature plummeted. Logan was in the cellar checking the ancient pipes. Suddenly, a sound cut through the floorboards. It was a bark. Not a playful bark. Not a warning to a stranger. It was a sharp, rhythmic signal. A call for help. Logan dropped his wrench. He scrambled up the stairs. Shadow was standing by the heavy front door. His ears were flat. His body was tense. He didn't look at Logan. He stared toward the woods, toward the small cottage half a mile away. That was Mrs. Martha's house. Logan grabbed his heavy coat. Shadow was already out the door. The dog leaped into the deep snow. He didn't run aimlessly. He carved a path directly toward the cottage. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke. But it was wrong. It was too thick, too bitter. They reached the porch. Shadow didn't wait. He pressed his nose against the door crack. He began to whine, a high, urgent sound. Shadow sensed something Logan could not. He could hear the frantic rhythm of a struggling heart inside. Logan hammered on the wood. "Martha, are you there?" No answer. Only the sound of a heavy thud from inside. Logan stepped back. He drew on the muscle memory of 1,000 missions. One hard kick. The doorframe splintered. The room was filled with a gray, choking haze. The chimney was blocked. The smoke was backing up. Martha was on the floor. She was clutching her chest. Her eyes were wide with terror. Shadow was at her side in an instant. He didn't lick her. He didn't jump. He laid his large, warm body against her shivering frame. He acted as a living blanket. His calm breathing seemed to steady her. Logan moved fast. He opened the windows. He dragged the smoldering logs out of the hearth and into the snow. He knelt beside the old woman. "Take deep breaths, Martha. Slow. Just follow Shadow." Minutes passed. The smoke cleared. The terror in Martha's eyes began to fade. She gripped Shadow's thick fur. "You came," she whispered. Her voice was thin as paper. "Shadow saved you, Martha." He knew. Logan realized then that the lodge could not just be a house. It had to be a sanctuary. By the next evening, Logan had made a decision. He dragged old armchairs into the main hall. He brewed pots of strong coffee. He hung a hand-painted sign on the gate. "Warming Station. All are welcome." They came slowly at first. Mr. Henderson from the hardware store, the retired librarians, the lonely widows. The town was cold. Heating oil was expensive. But Pine Rest was warm. The lodge changed. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was filled with the clinking of spoons and the low hum of voices. Shadow was the center of it all. He walked from chair to chair. He was a silent listener. He would rest his heavy head on a lonely knee. He would stay there for an hour. He didn't need words. He understood the weight of their grief. He understood the silence of an empty house. For these people, Shadow was more than a dog. He was an anchor. But the peace did not last. A black sedan pulled up the driveway. Victor stepped out. He didn't look at the people inside. He looked at his watch. "This is a violation," Victor shouted from the porch. "This building is not zoned for public assembly. It is a fire hazard." Logan walked out to meet him. "These people are cold, Victor. They are your neighbors." Victor smiled. It was a thin, cruel expression. "Rules are rules, Logan." An hour later, a truck arrived. 2 men in orange vests began working at the pole. The lights in the lodge flickered. Then they died. The hum of the water pump stopped. "Public safety," Victor called out as he drove away. "We can't have an unsafe grid." The room went dark. The seniors grew quiet. Fear returned to the air. Logan stood in the center of the hall. He felt the old spark of the SEAL team. The world was cold. The enemy was at the gate, but he was prepared. "Don't move, everyone," Logan said. His voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who had survived the dark. Logan moved with precision. He brought out the tactical lanterns. He fueled the old wood stove in the kitchen. He had stored gallons of fresh water in the cellar weeks ago. He knew how to hold a position. The seniors watched him. They saw his scars. They saw his steady hands. They felt safe. Shadow took his post by the front door. He sat perfectly still. He was a statue of gray and silver. Outside, a group of men moved through the trees. Victor's hired hands. They carried spray paint and heavy boots. They wanted to scare the guests. They wanted to break the windows. Shadow heard them. He didn't bark. He didn't give away his position. He simply stepped onto the porch. He let out a low, vibrating growl. It was a sound that came from the chest of a wolf. The men in the woods stopped. They saw the glowing amber eyes in the dark. They saw the massive frame of the dog. They turned back. Inside the lodge was warm. The firelight turned the room to gold. Logan poured more coffee. Shadow returned to Martha's side. He rested his chin on her lap. The power was gone. The water was off. But for the first time in a long time, no one was alone. The siege was on, but the fortress was holding. Chapter 3. Miracle in the Whiteout. The sky did not fall. It vanished. By midday, the world outside Pine Rest Lodge had turned into a wall of screaming white. This was the whiteout. In Maine, this kind of storm is a thief. It steals the horizon. It steals the path beneath your feet. It steals the very air from your lungs. Inside the lodge, the old wood stove groaned against the wind. Logan Reed was checking the window seals when the heavy front door rattled. It was Leo's father. He was a local mechanic, a man of iron and grease. But now he looked like a ghost. "My boy," he gasped. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Leo had been at the bus stop. He had seen a sparrow with a broken wing. The boy had a heart too big for his own safety. He had followed the bird into the tree line just as the sky collapsed. The police were grounded. The visibility was less than 3 feet. To go out was a death sentence. Logan looked at Shadow. The German shepherd was already standing. His gray and white fur rippled in the draft. Shadow didn't need to be told. He knew the scent of the town's children. He knew the smell of fear. "We are going," Logan said. He didn't say it to the father. He said it to the storm. Logan geared up with the precision of a soldier. Thermal layers, compass, high-intensity strobe. He tied a long, heavy nylon rope to his belt. He tethered the other end to Shadow's harness. If they were separated, they were lost. They stepped off the porch. The wind hit them like a physical blow. It was a roar that erased all thought. Logan could barely see his own hand. He leaned into the white. He felt Shadow's power pulling him forward. "Trust," the dog, Logan whispered. It was his only rule. They reached the bus stop. The snow was already waist-deep. Shadow put his nose to the ground, but the wind stripped the scent away instantly. The dog stopped. He tilted his head. He wasn't looking. He was listening. A German shepherd's ears are marvels of nature. They can filter the chaos. Shadow blocked out the scream of the gale. He blocked out the thud of Logan's heart. He moved his ears like radar dishes, 10 degrees to the left. Then he pulled. Shadow began to plow through the drifts. He was a silver ship in a frozen sea. He barked once, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the wind. Then he stopped again. He heard it. A tiny, rhythmic sob, a sound so faint it would have been invisible to any human ear. Shadow dove toward a jagged, rocky hollow near the old creek bed. He began to dig. Snow flew in great white clouds. Logan fell to his knees beside him. Leo was there. The boy was curled into a ball. His skin was the color of blue ice. He was holding a small, shivering bird against his chest. "He's cold, Logan. He's so cold." Logan didn't panic. He was a SEAL. He had trained for the impossible. He checked the boy's pulse. It was slow, thready. Early hypothermia. Logan opened his heavy tactical parka. He pulled the boy inside, skin to skin. He used his own body heat to jumpstart the boy's heart. Shadow pressed his massive, warm body against Leo's legs. They sat there in the hollow of the rock, a circle of warmth in a world of ice. "We have to move," Logan shouted over the roar. "Stay with me, Leo. Look at Shadow. Just look at the dog." The trek back was a nightmare. The wind had erased their tracks. Every direction looked exactly the same. But Shadow was different now. He wasn't just searching. He was scouting. The dog moved slowly. Suddenly he would stop and lean his weight back. Logan waited. A second later, a massive shelf of snow would collapse just inches away. Shadow sensed the hollows. He felt the vibration of the thin ice over the creek. He was Logan's eyes. He was Logan's survival. Step by step. Breath by breath. The nylon rope stayed taut. Logan's muscles burned. His face was numb, but the heat of the boy against his chest kept him moving. Finally, a faint orange glow appeared through the white. The lanterns of Pine Rest. The townspeople were gathered on the porch. They had been praying. They had been waiting. When the silhouette of the man and the dog emerged from the storm, a collective gasp broke the silence. Logan stumbled onto the porch. He handed the boy to his father. Leo was shivering now. That was a good sign. The blood was moving, and in the boy's hand, the sparrow was still alive. The lodge was no longer just a warming station. It was a sanctuary of miracles. The neighbors looked at Logan. They didn't see a stranger anymore. They didn't see a broken soldier. They saw a guardian. Martha brought a bowl of warm water for Shadow's paws. The men who had once looked at Logan with suspicion now offered a hand on his shoulder. In the shadows of the hallway, Victor stood alone. He watched the townspeople gather around the fire. He saw the way they looked at the dog. He saw the way they leaned toward Logan. Victor realized his mistake. He thought he was fighting for a piece of land. He realized now he was fighting for the soul of Clearwater, and the soul of the town had found its captain. Logan sat by the fire. Shadow laid his heavy head on Logan's boot. The wind continued to howl outside. But for the first time, Logan Reed didn't feel like he was at war. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Chapter 4. The Wooden Whistle and Forgiveness. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was different. It was a heavy, expectant silence. The snow outside Pine Rest Lodge was piled high. It acted as a white shroud over the scars of the town. Logan Reed was in the library. He was cleaning the soot from the mahogany shelves. Shadow was restless. The dog kept pacing near the back entrance. His nose was pressed against the doorframe. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He made a soft, questioning sound in the back of his throat. A man was standing in the shadows of the porch. He looked like a ghost of Arthur Sterling. He had the same high cheekbones, the same weary tilt to his shoulders, but his eyes were full of a decade of regret. This was Julian Sterling, the son who had walked away 10 years ago. Logan opened the door. He didn't speak. He didn't ask why the man had finally come home. In the military, Logan had learned to read the silence of a man. Julian's silence was loud with pain. Julian stepped into the warmth of the hall. He looked at the peeling wallpaper. He looked at the empty chair where his father used to sit. "I heard about the boy," Julian whispered. His voice was cracked like old leather. "I heard what you did, what the dog did." Logan nodded. He led Julian toward the fire. Shadow did something unexpected. Usually the dog was a guardian. He was a shield. But Shadow walked toward the small brass key box on the mantel. He nudged the lid with his nose until it flipped open. The dog reached in. He delicately picked up a small, weathered object. It was an old wooden whistle. Shadow walked over to Julian. He sat down. He waited until Julian looked at him. Then he placed the whistle in the man's hand. Julian's breath hitched. His fingers trembled as they closed around the wood. "I made this," Julian said. "I was 12 years old. I used it to train my first dog. My father told me it was the finest tool he had ever seen." He stared at the whistle. A single tear tracked through the dust on his face. "I thought he threw it away. I thought he threw everything of mine away when I left." Logan reached into the drawer of the desk. He pulled out a bundle of envelopes. They were tied with a simple piece of twine. "He didn't throw anything away, Julian." Logan placed the bundle on the table. "These are letters. Your father wrote one every single month for 10 years. He never sent them. He was a proud man. He was a stubborn man. But he never stopped waiting for you to walk through that door." Julian opened the first letter, then the second. The room was silent save for the crackle of the fire and the sound of paper turning. The letters spoke of the lake. They spoke of the lodge. But mostly they spoke of a father's hope. Arthur had written about the day Julian would return. He had planned the repairs they would do together. He had already forgiven his son long before Julian had even thought to ask. Logan watched the man break. It was a slow, quiet crumbling. Logan understood. He was the man who had stayed to help Arthur. Julian was the man who had fled. One carried the weight of the work. The other carried the weight of the absence. But in that moment, the empathy between them was a bridge. Suddenly the front door opened. Victor stepped inside. He didn't take off his hat. He didn't look at the fire. He walked straight to Julian. "Julian, you are finally here," Victor said. His voice was oily. "This man is a squatter. He is using your father's name to play hero. If you sign these papers, we can sue. We can end this trial. You can have your share of the money and leave this frozen dump forever." Victor pulled a pen from his pocket. He laid the legal documents on the table. "Think about it, Julian. You could start over. No more guilt. No more Maine winters." Julian looked at the documents. Then he looked at Logan. He saw the scars on Logan's hands from the repairs. He saw the kindness in Logan's tired eyes. Julian looked down at the wooden whistle in his palm. He remembered the letters. He remembered the father who had kept a wooden toy for 10 years. Julian picked up the legal papers. He didn't sign them. He walked to the hearth and dropped the documents into the flames. The fire roared as it consumed the ink and greed. "My father's legacy is not for sale," Julian said. His voice was no longer cracked. It was steady. Victor's face turned a deep, angry red. "You are a fool. This place is a ruin. You have nothing." Julian stood up. He was taller than Victor. He had the sterling strength in his back. "I have my father's house," Julian replied, "and I have a debt to pay." Victor turned and stormed out. The door slammed for the last time. The lodge felt lighter. Julian turned to Logan. "I am a carpenter by trade, Logan. I have spent years building things for people I didn't care about. If you will have me, I want to help you. I want to finish the work my father started. I want to make Pine Rest what it was meant to be." Logan looked at Shadow. The dog was leaning against Julian's leg. Shadow had known all along. Logan reached out and shook Julian's hand. "Welcome home, Julian. There is a lot of work to do." Julian smiled. It was the first real smile Logan had seen in that house since Arthur passed. The two men stood together in the library. One was a soldier. One was a son. Both were finally finding their peace. Shadow let out a long, satisfied sigh and curled up by the fire. The watch was still on, but now the burden was shared. Chapter 5. Where No One Stands Alone. The day of the final hearing arrived with a cold and biting wind. Clearwater was buried under the last heavy snow of the season. Inside the county courthouse, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and anxiety. Logan Reed sat at the wooden table. He wore his only suit. It felt tight across his shoulders. Beside him sat Julian Sterling. Across the aisle, Victor sat with a team of lawyers. He looked like a man who had already won. He did not look at the townspeople filling the benches. He only looked at the clock. The judge entered the room. Her name was Miller. She had a face like granite. Victor's lawyer stood up first. "Your Honor," he began. His voice was smooth and cold. "The defendant, Logan Reed, is a man of honor. We do not dispute his service. But he is a soldier struggling with deep mental scars. He has turned a historic property into an unregulated shelter. It is a safety hazard. He has no medical training, no staff. The elderly residents of this town are in danger under his care." Logan felt the familiar heat in his neck. The ghosts of the desert whispered in the back of his mind. He gripped the edge of the table. Shadow was lying at his feet. The dog felt the tension. He leaned his heavy weight against Logan's boot. The warmth of the dog acted like a shield. Mrs. Martha sat in the front row. She was dressed in her best Sunday coat. She wanted to speak for Logan. She wanted to tell the judge about the day the door was kicked in. But as the lawyer continued to drone on about liability and risk, Martha's face turned pale. She began to tremble. Her hand went to her purse, searching for a piece of candy. Her blood sugar was crashing. She was slipping into a shadow that no one in the room noticed, except for one. Shadow's ears suddenly snapped forward. He didn't bark. He stood up with a slow and deliberate grace. The judge looked down from her bench. "Mr. Reed, keep your animal under control," she warned. But Shadow was not looking at the judge. He moved away from Logan. He walked toward the spectator gallery. The bailiff reached for his belt. Logan held up a hand. "Wait," Logan said. His voice was a low command. Shadow reached Mrs. Martha. He didn't jump. He didn't make a sound. He shoved his cold nose directly into Martha's limp hand. He nudged her arm upward. He began to whine. A high and urgent frequency. Martha's eyes rolled back. She began to slump in her seat. Shadow barked once. a sharp and thunderous sound that cracked the silence of the court. He shoved his head under her shoulder, bracing her weight. Logan was over the railing in a second. "She is hypoglycemic!" Logan shouted. He reached into Martha's purse. He found the glucose tablets. He placed one under her tongue. He held her head steady. The room was chaos for a moment. Then the color began to return to Martha's cheeks. She blinked. She looked at the dog. "Oh, Shadow," she whispered. "You knew again." The judge stood up from her bench. She walked down to the gallery. She looked at Martha. Then she looked at the dog. Shadow was still there. He was licking Martha's hand. He was watching her eyes with an intensity that was almost human. The judge turned to Victor's lawyer. "You said this man has no staff," Judge Miller said. Her voice was quiet. "I see a level of care in this room that no hospital could provide. I see a dog that senses a medical crisis before a room full of people can even notice. And I see a community that protects its own." The judge walked back to her bench. She didn't need to hear more. "The lawsuit is dismissed," she declared. "The 6-month trial is over. Logan Reed has proven his worth." Victor stood up. He was shouting about appeals, but Julian Sterling stood up to meet him. Julian pulled a legal document from his pocket. "This is my official renunciation," Julian said. "I am the sole blood heir, and I am giving my share to the Pine Rest Community Trust. Logan Reed will be the director. I will be the foreman, and you, Victor, are no longer welcome on this land." The courtroom erupted, not with cheers, but with the sound of 100 people standing at once. Logan felt a weight lift off his chest that had been there for years. He looked at Julian. They shook hands. Then Logan knelt down. He buried his face in Shadow's thick gray and white fur. "Good boy," he whispered. A few weeks later, the air began to change. The ice on Moosehead Lake began to crack with the sound of distant thunder. The spring thaw had arrived. Logan stood in the driveway of the lodge. He had a new sign in his hands. It was made of solid Maine pine. Julian had carved the letters himself. Logan climbed the ladder. He hung the sign over the gate. "Pine Rest, where no one stands alone." Julian walked out onto the porch. He carried 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He handed one to Logan. The lodge was busy behind them. Mr. Henderson was painting the shutters. Leo was playing in the yard with the sparrow which had finally taken flight. The seniors were sitting in the new sunroom laughing at a story. Logan sat on the top step. Shadow laid down between the 2 men. The dog looked out over the lake. His amber eyes were peaceful. Logan looked at the house. He looked at the people. He realized something he had never understood in the middle of a war. He thought he had stayed in Clearwater to save Arthur's dream. He thought he had worked himself to the bone to save the lodge. But as the sun warmed his face, he knew the truth. The lodge had saved him. The community had given him a reason to wake up. Shadow had given him a way to feel again. Logan Reed was no longer a soldier lost in the fog. He was home. And for the first time in his life, the silence was finally kind. In the end, Pine Rest was never just about the wood and stone. It taught us that no winter is too cold when we stand together, and no soul is truly lost when a loyal heart leads the way home. Kindness is the only fire that never goes out. If Shadow and Logan's journey touched your heart today, please share this story with someone who needs a little warmth. Do not forget to subscribe and join our family in the comments below. And before you go, the next chapter of courage is waiting for you in the video right here on your screen.